Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me out there. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Connor Kelly O'Brien. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Scranton Fringe Festival. Thank you for your patience. We had some technical difficulties on my end using a brand new camera system tonight that I did test. This is the first episode of Fringe Focus, previously known as Fringe Dialogue of 2021. This is sort of our opportunity to cast a light on creative and cultural and community leaders from across the region and beyond. I am going to bring our guest up momentarily. I did want to remind everybody that we are live, if you're watching this live on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch, and you can comment and we will respond. Hello, friends. We will see your comments and we will get to them. You can ask questions, you could just say hello, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the show about some of our upcoming guests, but we've waited long enough. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage Tonyehn Verkitus. Tonyehn is the executive director of the Lackawanna and Luzerne County Medical Societies. Her work in the nonprofit world has mostly centered on health and food, though she's also spent many years training organizations and communities on fundraising and telling their mission-based stories. Storytelling is going to be a big theme in tonight's episode. In 2007, along with her family and friends, she started Africa Community Exchange, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to support an effective model of education for youth and educators. She sits on such boards as the Lackawanna County Arts and Culture Education Department, the WVIA Community Advisory Board, and she leads educational programs for the Luzerne County Opioid Task Force through the District Attorney's Office. She has a very long bio. As a holistic life coach and writer, she's interested in the intersection between personal stories and community activism. She's one of the new hosts of Keystone Edition on WVIA TV, their health correspondent, or their health edition correspondent, I should say. And we're going to be talking a lot about tonight the podcast, Life End, that you might have seen, created in partnership with Scranton Fringe Park Multimedia, and of course, Lackawanna and Luzerne County Medical Societies. Tonyehn is the producer and host of that podcast. Without further ado, please welcome to the virtual stage, Tonyehn Verkitus. Hi, how are you doing?
That was a lot.
You have a long bio.
It really is long. I think we can chop a few things.
I did, but well deserved. No, seriously, well deserved. I skipped some sections about the specifics of certain work. I'm not sure we need to cover. First and foremost, how are you doing today?
I am good. Making the best in this crazy world that we live in, trying to use some time for self-care this weekend, which involves puzzling and cooking, but anything to calm the mind.
You genuinely like puzzles?
I adore puzzles.
Oh, good. I'll have to keep that in mind. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
I like puzzle games, and I like puzzle mystery activity.
Yeah.
To put together a puzzle, I have to be in just the right mood to.
Oh yeah, no, I love puzzles.
We have some more and more friends joining us. We'll give them a minute. Hello, everybody. Please comment and join the conversation live. So tonight's theme might as well be storytelling, and I sort of want to know. We've had this, and if someone has maybe watched you on this program before many moons ago, we might have had a similar conversation. But just to recap and talk to some of our new friends, this is such a generic question, but why is storytelling so important? And much, much more importantly, I'm much more interested in hearing your connection to storytelling and how it's mattered and the shapes it's taken throughout your life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just think stories are so important in general from a very young age, right? The Frog and Toad books, or this is what people do all day, from a very young age. I love stories. I kind of love living in this fantasy world where anything could happen and everything was real, right? Unlike the real world. So stories in that sense have always been very engaging for me. Stories, when I think about it in a broader sense, personal stories, I find personal stories so intriguing because we all have multiple different stories. There's no one story. And somewhere buried within all those stories is kind of like the true you. But I feel that we all have stories that we live by. They're not necessarily exactly who we are, but it's maybe what we've been told we are. And then there's your personal stories. I'm always really interested in how do we get past what we think we are, what we're supposed to be, to figure out what our own personal true story is, but then also using those stories to create action. So.
Without going into too much detail, because no one watching this needs to be, updated on what happened this week. I would love to find someone that's like, what's been happening?
Right.
A crew? No. What I would be curious to know that, in your bio, we talked about one of many things. We talked about, storytelling, being able to bridge community. I didn't write it. Being able to bridge communities and the work that you've done as an advisor, as a nonprofit leader, as a coach in storytelling. When we feel there's so much divisiveness, and what's so interesting to me is that when done properly, true first-person storytelling is true. First of all, it's authentic. It's a matter of perspective.
Right.
And storytelling is very different than ideological rhetoric. Right.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Very different things. So how do we? Let's make this very local and very real. How are you using storytelling and falling back on what you know about storytelling to kind of cope this week? Not puzzles aside.
Right. Well, I just think storytelling helps to build empathy, right? So if I tell you my true firsthand experience, it's going to be very hard for you to argue about what happened to me. Whether or not you understand, whether or not you agree, whether or not you may not even feel bad for me. Maybe you think I deserved it. But the point is, it's just a true story. And all you can do is accept it. And I think when we share stories like that, it helps to kind of bridge this divide, right? There could be a story that I tell where you're like, what the hell? I don't get that. But then I could tell a story about dinner at my grandmother's house. Most people have had that experience. So there's a place where we can kind of connect, right? And say that's a shared experience. And that's the thing about storytelling. I think if you tell enough stories, true stories, you can find some sort of common ground.
Right. And a true, authentic story, your true, authentic story does not negate, disqualify, or make mine. There are times and places when certain stories need to be centered more than others, of course.
Right.
But none of that makes that. That's what I think is so. Everything we're watching in the news and everything we're watching in our communities and world right now, and I shouldn't say everything, but the things that are rising to the top and obviously the most important.
Right.
As if at A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z are mutually exclusive. Like it's this idea that you can be having a really hard time of it. It does not mean that you're having this experience, over here. And I think that that's so important and powerful.
The thing I just want to say though about storytelling is if someone really wants to participate in the telling of my story, they have to choose before they enter to be non-judgmental. Because then that's when ideological, things are coming to the forefront, possibly. So you have to decide, I'm going to listen to your story and I'm not judging you. I may not get it. I may not understand. It'd be nice if I have the opportunity to ask questions, but judgment has to be left at the door.
Right. Absolutely. And with all the work you do in storytelling, how has that impacted? Well, let's take a step back and let's talk about one of your roles, probably your primary role right now is the executive director of the Lackawanna County and Luzerne County Medical Society. So before we'll bring storytelling back in, but just in a general sense, for those who have no idea what that organization is, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so the Medical Society is at the forefront a membership organization for physicians, and we support some physicians in their role, their well-being, their education, etc. But also within that is the fact that physicians want to support their communities as well. And the example I always like to use is the fact that the physicians used to be kind of like your confessor, your lender, your psychiatrist. It wasn't just the person that you went to for a prescription. And when I began my role at the Medical Society, I thought, how can we make physicians that part of our community again? Yes, granted, they're not necessarily going to pull up at your house with their medicine bag and solve all your problems, but where is the role for physicians within the community? And I mean, they're a trusted resource. So how do we bring them back into being active in the community? So that's kind of how we got started in this whole, what led to the podcast, sort of thinking about how do we deal with common public health issues without just slapping a Band-Aid on it, I guess.
Right. Even though Band-Aids are something that you trade in.
Band-Aids work plenty of times.
No, fantastic. So through this, you've done lots of work in projects. What are some other things? We'll get to the podcast in 1 second. What are some other things that you're working on, even very briefly, at the...
Well, especially with this particular program, I do have to say that the podcast is funded by a very generous grant from the health department. And when the grant, yes, 100%, when the grant was finalized, it was right at the beginning of COVID. So I had all kinds of ideas for the types of programs that we do. And of course, if you can't meet in person, then how do you do these programs? So the podcast was one of the interesting things that came out of trying to figure out how to creatively meet people where they are. We're doing a program with seniors and K through 5 students. We're calling it a Pick Pal as opposed to a Pen Pal. There's a program called Foster Grandparents, and they normally work with children in person, but they haven't been able to do that. So we have these kids at the Y who are coloring pictures. The pictures are actually done by Sarah Regan, who we all know and love. They're her sunny and cloudy characters, and they're talking about self-care. So the kids are learning about self-care, coloring these pictures, sending them off to the grandparents. And then the grandparents I bought them adult coloring books, but they have adult coloring books, and they're coloring pictures and then writing little messages and sending them back to these kids.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it is. But we're talking about self-care, and that's super important right now. I mean, substance use is still there, but with COVID going on, we have to think about all the things that may cause a substance misuse problem, right? And I think self-care and mental health are at the forefront right now. So that's one way we're kind of bridging that gap so that it works for K through 5 kids, but then also seniors are being engaged. So that's just one example of many, many things.
Hearing that, I want to mention little humble brag. Sunny and Cloudy are original characters that premiered at the Scranton Fringe Festival 3 years ago, I want to say, maybe 4.
Yes.
Could be wrong, but and all credit to Sarah and her team.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. That's a lot of programs. And all of those, including the podcast, those are all from that same grant or some.
Yeah. And we're trying to think about the demographics that we wanted to focus on primarily were homeless or homeless youth as a focus within homeless, K through 5. We do have some work that we're going to start with kind of that 12 to 18-year-old group and seniors. So that's been our focus for the first 12 months. The first 12 months ends about March. And then that next period, it's a 3-year grant. We'll have to come up with some new programs, but we do have our hands pretty full. It's not like I need to create a whole bunch of new stuff, but if anyone has any good ideas for partnership.
It's not even the podcast is over. That's still an ongoing project. So the name of the podcast, for anyone out there who isn't familiar, is Life End. Each season focusing on a different particular type of topic. So, for example, season 1 was Life End, substance misuse. The podcast, full transparency, was created in partnership with Scranton Fringe and Park Multimedia, the Lackawanna County Luzerne Medical Societies and Tonyehn at the helm. But I'm just trying to find the best way to word it. What were your original, I'll just ask, what were your original goals and objectives for this storytelling-based podcast? And for those that don't know, it's very much structured where each episode features a different person telling a true first-person account of some narrative relating to that season's topic, and then an interview conversation style with Tonyehn at the end of the episode. Special thanks to Jess Meone and DJ Williams for graphics and sound and music respectively for the podcast. What were your objectives before the podcast launch? And now that we have season 1 under our belts, what was achieved? Maybe what we did, maybe what did we miss the mark on a little bit, and what were some new discoveries you made? And I'm just going to, anyone who's watching this live right now, I am putting the link to the podcast via the Scranton Fringe website in the comments wherever you're watching this. You can now find it directly. You can also go to Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
So initially, when you and I actually discussed this podcast, I was trying to figure out interesting ways to deal with stigma, right? Like, you see the billboards, people have done all sorts of marketing campaigns around stigma related to substance misuse. But how can we reduce stigma in a way that actually helps to build empathy, not just saying, oh, we don't say drug addict, we say, or, a recovered drug addict, you say person in recovery or something of that sort, because we want to use person first language. But how can we do things that are more meaningful and that actually engage the folks that we're trying to reduce stigma with? So storytelling, once again, it's a firsthand story. It helps to build empathy. And I think it's really helped people understand that you never know who that person might be. I think we often think it's the person under the bridge or something of that sort, but really it could be me, And I know that there are people who have listened to the podcast, my mother, for instance, and she's just blown away by these stories because, A, they're really heartbreaking. They're not, fun listens per se. There is always, or there has been thus far, something positive at the end, but that doesn't mean that we'll always have stories with a happy ending. There may be stories that don't have a happy ending.
Just to give everyone frame of reference, and I believe each episode that there is a trigger warning in the opening narrative, which we were very conscientious about. Some of the, and again, this is all information these individuals willingly offer. I mean, the narratives and the experiences range from loss of a child, an adult child, to their own, of course, own personal substance misuse journey, to sex trafficking. I mean, it is not like every episode ends with a seed of joy, if not complete and utter joy. But I mean, the journey getting to that point is quite. It's a lot. I mean, just being very transparent, it can be a lot. Which I think is, I've had a lot of. I will notice something because I've sent podcasts to friends that I have nothing to do with, and they've listened to it in like a day, and they'll immediately reply to me and be like, "Oh, that was great." I sent this link to someone like the first episode like a month ago, and they finally got back to me, and they openly said, one, they were just busy, which is totally fine, but they said, "I'll be honest with you, it took me more than one sit-in and the episodes are only 20 some minutes."
Yeah, they're not long.
They said, especially for people that we may never know, you could send it to a friend thinking, they'll enjoy a good storytelling podcast.
Right.
And you have no idea what's going to resonate with them.
I always like to share how Alyssa's episode for me, and it's not even so much the story, even though her story is amazing. Mm-hmm. From the moment that microphone comes on, she starts and she goes, where do I start? Or
I know
to that effect. And you're kind of like, oh boy, where are we about to go? But the fact that she starts with that kind of deep inhalation and where do I begin? To me, that's immediately, I'm empathetic. I don't even care what your story is. If someone could hear that and not immediately, A, wonder where's this going, but B, have complete empathy for her as she tells her story, then you're just the Grinch. I don't know.
Right. No, absolutely. 100%. And it's, you can listen to these stories and have no world experience that quite relates to that, but specifically referencing Alyssa, who I think is episode 3 of the season.
I believe so.
3. Is it 3?
Yes.
Yes. Something she said, we've talked about this many times, and it sounds like a broken record, but it really struck with me when she made a comment about every relationship that she can remember ever having was transactional.
Yeah.
Even though I have no frame of reference into her life experience, and I can't begin to put myself in her shoes by trying to, if not empathize, just sympathize and come to terms with that. That was almost an inroad for me, where it's like, well, that's not my experience with all my relationships, but I am aware of a pattern in my adult life where. And I think anyone out there, especially if you're very passionate about your career, I think we very much can start thinking in that quid pro quo mindset.
Right.
And again, I took something that she shared in her authenticness, and I was able to apply a totally different but still similar experience
Yes.
in a relationship, which I think is that at its absolute best.
Exactly.
Was there anything, we're going to move on in a minute to season 2 and what that theme is and why we chose that. And you might have already touched on this, but why season 1 substance misuse? And the concept of life end is that life end, theoretically, that there's a never-ending list of topics.
Right.
One of those topics over and over and over. Why that topic in particular?
Well, I think it seems like the low-hanging fruit, right? Based on the fact that this grant was to fund, well, initially kind of anything having to do with opioids, but nowadays we realize that opioids aren't the problem. Actually, alcohol is a much bigger problem in our region than anything else. So it just became substances in general. So I think starting the podcast, I don't know if it just seemed, it'll be really easy to get people to talk about this, or at that point also hadn't really thought about what are the myriad paths that we may want to take in this life and journey. What are we willing to touch on? What are we willing to discuss? And that was a very heavy, weighty topic. And I think starting there made sense, but it also took away the fear for broaching any other topic, that's for sure. Just because the stories, covered different generations, different sexes, vastly different stories, even though they have the common theme of substance use. So it opened us up for anything after that, I think, personally.
Absolutely. And with that being said, we are, we've kind of already touched on it in the podcast, I believe, but we are, officially getting ready to launch the call for season 2 storytellers. And we are hoping to do that, start recording very, very soon. We already have a few lined up. And do you want to talk a little bit about what the theme for season 2 is and why?
Yes. So the theme for season 2 is isolation. Of course, it partially came to mind because of COVID, but not just because of COVID, but within the stories we hear in season 1, I think that isolation of some sort or another plays a role in every story. And then having spoken to people about the podcast and just storytelling in general, I started to realize that isolation could really mean anything. Like it does. Yes, it's COVID. We're all isolated. We can't see our family. But I think of, for instance, as my sister being isolated because she lives in a different country and she's raising her children there. And sure, we can FaceTime and talk. But even without COVID, she's still sort of isolated. Even going to college can be isolating. So it doesn't have to be a huge dramatic isolation, but something that has affected your life in a particular way. For whatever reason, that isolation stands out in your mind.
Yeah. And we've just commented, again, wherever you're watching this, I think, yes, so far all of our audience members are joining us through Facebook, which is
okay.
So everyone, if you go to the Facebook, if you're watching this video on Facebook, go down to the comment section and you'll find apply for season 2 Life End. And if you just click on that link, and I'm going to do it myself just to make sure. Yep. If you do that link, a little bit about the organizations that are making this happen, the theme, and everything from, just to clarify, anyone can be a storyteller. I think a common misconception from Fringe that whenever we do story slams or these kind of storytelling-based projects, everyone thinks they need to be like a writer, a performer, a great public speaker. It could not be further from the truth. We do sometimes, that is sometimes a common factor just because those individuals are more comfortable being public and sharing narratives, but literally anyone of any walk of life, a plumber, a teacher, retired, homemaker, a lawyer, like anyone from any walk of life, any life experience can be a great storyteller. We are doing all of our recording remotely as we did for season 1, thanks to Dan from Park Multimedia. You just need to have access to good Wi-Fi and a relatively quiet place to record. Don't let any tech concerns freak you out. It could not be simpler. If you've ever been on a Zoom call or if you FaceTime with a friend, you can handle the editing and all the tech end of things. If selected, it doesn't really take that long, and to fill out the application on average takes about 5 minutes. And obviously you need to be prepared with a little bit of an outline of what your story might be about. And as Tonyehn said, anything relating to the theme of isolation is welcome. And we really want you to, I don't want to say think outside the box, but really ask yourself, I think we've all had an isolated experience. So I would just be curious to know if you asked yourself, when did I feel the most isolated? Or what was the most unique isolation I've ever experienced? I think we might get some really cool submissions. I see we have lots of friends joining us on Facebook. Hello to David, hello to Terry, who just liked and loved. If you have any questions, please comment below. Questions, comments. We love interacting with people when we do this. Thank you for tuning in. I know this is the first of the year. So Tonyehn, for season, what are some, in no particular order, if we went on to do this for 20 more seasons, in no particular order and no promises and you might change your mind tomorrow, what are some other themes that really resonate with you right now?
So we did talk a little bit about doing a season on depression, because I think that's a huge topic that probably could do well with some extra coverage, especially firsthand stories. Mm-hmm. I really want to do a season on celebration, just because there are so many different things that people celebrate, but what is that biggest celebration of your life? I mean, it could be very different for very different people.
Yeah.
I don't know. Life and family, as you and I have spoken about quite a bit.
I really love to do one on home, just the word.
Oh, home would be a good one too. Like what does home mean? I know that home for me for a long time, gosh, it was almost like the things I took with me to each place that I lived, because I moved so much growing up that I have certain items that, were around when I was 6. So they're still in my house now, actually.
What's one of those items?
I have this cool glass blown fish that my mother, someplace in the 70s from some hippie artist friend of hers, made it for her. And I can remember it being on the bookshelf when I was growing up. And now it's on my staircase, little shelf.
We're going to put a pin in that for 1 second, because I just want to pull up a comment. We had a comment from David. Hello, love what you are doing here. Hello, David. I believe David, I knew David was the public library director at the West Pittston Library in Pennsylvania. Thank you for having us, David. David definitely spread the word about the application for the
Thank you.
Watching. Now, Tonyehn, I'm well aware, because we've had many conversations, but you mentioned when I said home that it was almost the things you brought with you, because you've lived in so many places throughout your life.
Right.
In no particular order, just for any of those out there any of our friends who are still getting to know you, can you list some general locations? We don't need like your address and like door code. But
okay, I'll just do a quick list. Germany, Connecticut, Liberia, New Jersey, Virginia, Scotland, super briefly, South Carolina, North Carolina, here. I think that sums it up. What I can remember off the top of my head, the big ones.
Very nice. We have a comment from Jess Mione. It's not showing up on the StreamYard thread. So Jess, I apologize. I can't pull it up yet, but if I can, I will. But it says, Tonyehn is I'm looking at it separately on my own social media. Tonyehn is such a down-to-earth and empowering soul. Thank you for all your work in our community. And that was Jess.
Thank you.
Oh, lovely. We also have lots of hello to Sarah, Sabrina, Abigail, and Amber. Amber Viola also being a guest the last time you were here with you.
Yeah.
I guess if I share it to my personal page, I don't see. Okay, I'll have to look into that. It's just not coming up on the end right now. That's fascinating. If anyone has a question for any of the locations Tonyehn just rattled off, Africa or here in the States or in Scotland briefly, for your life experiences there, if there was one guest that we could get on the podcast, one person in the whole world, let's say living, let's keep it within the realm of possible. And we're going to say not someone within Northeast Pennsylvania. We'll say that's a given, that if we find them, we can make it happen. But in the great wide world, anyone you follow, anyone you admire, who's a storyteller that you would love to have? Money's no object.
Right. So this one's actually pretty easy for me because I was just in a meeting a couple of weeks ago where they said if you could have lunch with anyone, who would that be? And it happens to be a writer. And that writer is Zadie Smith. She is a British writer. She wrote the book White Teeth. But what I love, she wrote numerous books, but I think that was the first one that I read. What I love about her is she is mixed race, but she writes this book that so well explains how I've often felt in my life, actually kind of isolated, right? So her mother's white and the father's Nigerian in the novel, I believe, but in real life, I think her mother's Jamaican and maybe the father's British. I don't remember exactly. But that idea of growing up in a household where you have parents that are different. So for me, my mother was Liberian and my father was American. And then her being in England growing up and still having some of these kind of like Afro-Caribbean ideals in her household, which is something that I also very much had. Like, you know, I don't speak like this at home. I speak in Liberian English to my mother and we ate Liberian food. But then we also always lived in very white neighborhoods. And I went to schools where I was one of 3 Black kids. So it was always this weird, where is my space in life? Like, where do I fit? And eventually I figured I just fit with myself. You know, this is my space right here, my body, I guess. But because she writes about these things, and I think she does it so well, not all her books are about this. She's always been someone that I'd just like to sit down and have a cup of coffee with.
That's interesting. I love that. I have heard of that book before, and that's really, really cool. I want to go back to something because I think it's so, and when we're talking about authentic storytelling, it's so important to be, you know, open and honest with what we're comfortable with, of course. And you touched upon something when you mentioned about the way you talk in certain spaces and certain, and for those who don't know, there's a common term referred to as code switching, which, if I'm correct and understand, is a lot of BIPOC individuals, Black, Indigenous people of color. It's the, you know, and I think it could theoretically apply to others, but I would assume it's predominantly within that culture, that like there's a, you know, your natural way of talking has not always been welcomed in quote unquote professional settings, even though it had no impact on one's ability to be a professional.
Right.
Or, you know, maintain. Just to clarify, do you still feel that way at times, or do you feel that you've kind of reached an equilibrium of Tonyehn across all?
I mean, so the way I'm speaking now is the way I speak in general, right? At home, I speak with a Liberian accent because my mother's Liberian, and that's just what I grew up with. Yet, at the same time, I can say in certain situations, I've been told I sound too white. In other situations, I've been told I was too aggressive, I think meaning Black. So there's different spaces where you find that even though you're just presenting yourself as you are, there's still something wrong with you, I guess. And I know my kids definitely talk about it as well. So it's just interesting. Having had the experience, I can talk to them very candidly about it. And hearing them talk about it as well, it's kind of like, oh, gosh, this is still happening, you know, and you wish when you have kids that they're not going to live these same experiences, but they are.
Right. And what do you, as a mother of 2 wonderful, brilliant, and talented young women of color, how do you prepare them for that, or do you, or is it a conversation of you wait until it happens? Is there a
No, I think I've always tried to make my girls really independent. I've always tried to make them very proud of who they are and praising them for exactly who they are, but not in the sense that you're the best, you're the greatest. No, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if you should do that sport. That's not your thing. I'm very realistic, but also help them to understand that they have other skills and qualities that maybe they're not tapping into. I think when, you know, Black Lives Matter started, I kind of had this moment of like, I really thought that I wasn't going to have to go through this with my children. So that was a little heartbreaking, but it was interesting because my oldest really, really started doing a lot of her own research and wanting to understand more, but her peers weren't necessarily wanting to have those conversations. And she was or is a junior in high school. Now, my younger, who's a freshman in high school, she and her peers are a lot more vocal about it and willing to have that conversation and call people out, which is just like amazing to me. And I don't know if it's a difference of age. They're only 2 years apart, but it's very interesting to me that 11th grade is already starting to become kind of rank and file, I guess. I don't know. But these freshmen in high school are just super verbal about it. It's very interesting. I don't know how to explain it because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But.
No, I know what you mean. It's. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that experience, but it is interesting how the paradigm of generation shifts so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember. So this was, but this past November, 2 months ago, I would have celebrated my 10-year reunion from high school,
Right.
Which was a whole other conversation on that.
Don't get me started.
But it was, and I mean, COVID aside, I mean, I'm really glad I had an excuse to not go. No, but it was interesting because I was invited back. I've been invited back once or twice since I graduated, for like it gets better, kind of speech with it. But I remember going back, and it was 5 years. It was the first year that none of them would have interested that overlapped with me.
Right.
It was 5 years later. I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember going and, there was a couple of queer kids and gay kids that wanted to ask questions. And I remember it was really and I obviously I'm not talking to a child without an adult, without a teacher present, but it was could I ask you about what's it like in New York and just blah, blah. And it was really sweet. And then I went back a year ago, right before COVID, and thinking I'm much more wiser now, much more confident. I'm going to tell these kids. They were the most radical little, starting their own LGBTQ students, in a good way, starting their own LGBTQ student association, working on, pronoun references in the classroom and gender identity studies integrated with their English language program. Wow. And I was just I had nothing to teach them.
Yeah.
I had nothing to offer in a good way. I was they were so much more advanced and progressive. And that was only, that was 10 years from my time, but it was only, it was 9 or 8 years since my time, but it was only maybe 3 or 4 years. The kids that I spoke to when they were freshmen were now the seniors since the last time we went back. Right. So in that 4 years time, it was just so shocking, in that instance, in a good way, how much further the dialogue has been moved. And I don't know if that's just social media. I don't know if that's...
It's definitely social media plays a role in that. But I do appreciate and respect the fact that kids in general are a lot more vocal and aware, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and maybe I'm crazy, but I feel a little because I went to high school in the 80s, I'm aging myself, but the 80s was this weird, boys wearing eyeliner and people all in black, and I'm going to wear rainbow clothes and rubber bracelets and whatever. But everyone had their own little thing, but you still kind of all hung out together. Maybe it was my school. Maybe it was just me because I always was crossing boundaries. I was never happy to just hang out with one group of folks. Mm-hmm. But I feel that was there. And then I feel it disappeared a little bit. And maybe I'm just glorifying my years, but there was something then that was very, think about hair bands. Those men had long hair and eyeliner and super tight pants and
right.
I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but it just seems there is a
non-consistent yet at the same time cyclical recurrence of certain things. I will also say that this is not quite the same thing in different time periods, but I've been researching it from I've been researching feminist writers that cover media and cinema and television. I felt before anyone even told me that there is a distinct shift in the direction, and there was a lot of room to go, and it was very much centered on white feminism, to be clear. but there was like a feminist lens, you know, in like the late 90s, early the year 2000, 2001. And it seems like post 9/11 in like movies and TV shows, there seemed to be like more progress was being made. And then from like 2002 to like maybe 2009, 8, there was like a weird, like, we went back to very like moderate narratives. And I'm not equipped yet to give like full proof, but I could say that if you think about TV shows and like, think about, even though now looking back, they seem pedestrian, but the loops that shows were made and movies were making in the late 90s, that's, we didn't just slow down. In some instances, they like reversed.
Yeah.
It was, and I don't know
about it. If we're thinking post 9/11, everyone wanted to, I don't know how else to put it, be back home around the fireplace. And
it very much became a narrative of like, now is not the time to push envelopes.
Right.
Now is not the time.
We all just kind of come together in our nice old little old-fashioned way.
Very transparent. I mean, that was the beginning of this resurgence of nationalism that led to such things as, which I think, to give credit, you know, to be transparently, intellectually honest, some of this happened even under the Obama administration. Like the NFL started getting money to do huge patriotic displays at the top of it's so, which, I mean, you know, we can trace from there through why it became such a impactful platform for people like Colin Kaepernick. And like, it's so interesting to see that these things that that some people in the nation look at as these like prideful touchstones were really only invented at that level in a post 9/11 world. I know we're going way off topic here, but from a storytelling perspective, just to bring it back, I think that it does show how important storytelling is, because how quickly our perspectives and experiences can change.
Oh yeah.
Right, that, you know, that I shouldn't assume that someone that graduated 4 years before, or I talk to people that graduated high school, and I'm only using that as an example of age, and generational brackets, but you know, 5 or 6 years ahead of me that had a totally different, you know, worldview and our relationship to the internet and our relationship to technology. We have a comment here from Sarah Regan that we mentioned earlier.
Hi, Sarah.
Heart emoji, heart emoji. Hi, Sarah. Hope you're still watching. Hello, hello, hello. We were talking about sunny and cloudy moments ago, if you were watching then. Very, very cool. We have, hello, Robin, who loved this. David and Tara and Fringe, I've already commented. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We are nearing the end of our time together. We still have a few more minutes. Was there anything we didn't get a chance? And also, this is the last call. If you're watching and you wanted to review something or a question on something, please comment now, or you can always contact us and we'll get back to you. But Tonyehn, I'm going to, in a few minutes, go over some of our upcoming guests in the weeks to come. But is there anything that we didn't have enough time to touch on, or you really want to really reinforce maybe about the podcast or something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just like to say about the podcast, anyone can be a storyteller, and it does not matter whether or not you think your story is interesting. I can assure you it is probably more interesting than you believe. And stories that seem pedestrian are sometimes kind of just what we need, right? It's like something that you can ease into like a cozy sweater, as opposed to, okay, I have to pause and come back to this story because there's a lot here for me to take in. But other than that, no, I'm just super grateful to your help and Park Media, and Jess and my brother for his music. I think that this is going to continue for a while.
I agree.
I'm excited about it. I really, and maybe I just don't listen to enough podcasts, but I don't think there's anything else like it exactly.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and obviously lots of storytelling podcasts, but I think we have a cool little formula.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, as much as we talked about that some of the narratives are hard to, not hard, but are very impactful, it's still relatively a quick, journey. You could listen to it after commute to and from work in a day per episode. Please go apply. As Tonyehn said, everyone's stories are interesting. It's probably way more impactful and interesting than you know. It's all done remotely, so you don't have to worry about COVID safety when we're recording. you don't have to worry about fumbling. It's not like you have to tell your story beginning to end without interruption. Dan at Park Multimedia, while keeping true to your narrative, and we do not edit, and we don't edit a story out of your story, but we make sure that the ums and the trip ups and the dog barking in the background gets edited out as much as possible. So
right, you're not going to listen back to yourself and feel silly. We'll make sure that.
And we take very much. And also, just to mention, we reference Alyssa, and that's how she's referenced in the whole episode. That was the only instance this season. But if you have a very, very powerful story to tell, and you'd rather go by a pseudonym or only a first name basis for whatever reason,
right,
we are willing to work with you on that. We understand.
The only other thing I'd throw out there is if folks have ideas for themes for following seasons, please share those.
Yes, because our hope is to, once we get into the thicket of recording season 2, is to have it be a much quicker turnaround for recording season. Like in a perfect world, I'd love if we were recording season 3 when season 2 was airing.
Exactly.
We get a little tired. Season 1, we had some hiccups on timelines, and we're going to try to pick up the pace and get a little more tight with that.
So if you don't help us, we'll just make up a theme as soon as we hang up, and we'll have
to roll with it. So season maybe for 3, 4, or 5. We'd love to hear your suggestions. I'm going to check. No other comments yet. Okay. Thank you so much for Tonyehn for joining us this evening. If you're watching this after the fact, please still check out the comment section, apply, share the link. We're going to be promoting this a lot this upcoming week. Join me for the next 4 weeks. We have our guests planned on Sunday. It's always Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Next Sunday, we have Kenneth L. Huston. He's the president of the NAACP Pennsylvania State Conference.
Oh.
January 24th, we have Dr. Catherine Richmond Cullen, Director of Arts and Education, NEPA, and Liz Feist, the Assistant Director of Arts and Education, NEPA. On January 31st, we have Lindsay Taylor. Lindsay is the festival producer for the Orlando Fringe Festival, which is the largest and most longest running Fringe Festival in North America. I think it's the longest running in North America. I can't promise it's the longest. It's the biggest size, but we'll find out on January 31st. And on February 7th, we have Glynis M. Johns, founder and CEO of the Black Scranton Project. And we are already booking guests for the rest of February and March and April. It is my goal that we are going to have 52 episodes of this show by this time next year. We may skip a week here and there. Maybe we'll do like a bonus episode to fill in, but one way or another, we will get that. And of course, Tonyehn, we'd love to have you back, maybe to kick off next season. So for the next podcast season, should I say. Everyone, thank you again so much. Tonyehn, if people want to learn more about the Medical Society or any of your work, where would you recommend they check out?
You can check our website, which is www.luz, Lack, L-A-C-K, medsoc, short for medical society.org.
LUZLACKMED.org?
MEDSOC.org.
Oh, SOC. I'm going to fix that right now because I'm going to put it up on the screen. 1 second. There we go. You can go check that out right down there. And Tonyehn, while we give people a second to record that or listen to that or write that down, what are you doing this week for self-care and to kind of take your mind off everything that's happening?
Well, I do have some baking challenges ahead of myself. I'm really not a baker at all because you have to follow directions and I'm not really good at that. So my daughter really wanted to bake a cake. And then I also found a recipe to make churros in the air fryer because we've become addicted to our air fryer. So those plan.
I'm obsessed with my air fryer.
Oh my gosh, it's the best thing ever.
I cook fish almost every other night. It's so easy to make because I love, I like to eat fresh and relatively healthy and lots of veggies. I will say I just get so lazy and tired.
Oh, yeah. The air fryer is a godsend.
Amazing. No one's getting paid here, by the way, by the air fryer.
Y'all, just go buy yourself an air fryer.
Maybe we should do an entire episode of just people talking about air fryers.
I have at least 5 converts I can bring to the show. My
sister Maggie converted me, and and my mother and my family who also live in Scranton. Seriously.
It's a show. It's the theme of the next Life and
Life and air fryers. With that being said, have a good night, everyone. Join us next week. Take care.